Thanks for joining me. My name is Dave Miller. I am the Unpleasant Blind Guy. This series, Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, is about what happens when large numbers of Muslims are introduced into free societies for whatever reason. As people from the state of Vermont and other states in the United States of America know, tens of thousands of these individuals are now being imported into our country with practically no vetting, despite what the Obama administration says, and I've been talking about the long-term implications that will come from that through interviews with people from Canada and the United Kingdom, which have larger populations of Muslims by percentage than the United States. The indigenous people of all colors of these countries are far better aware of the consequences of increased populations of Muslims in their societies. And in this episode of the series, we turn to the impact of larger numbers of Muslims on women. Now, much was made by progressives in the United States of America of a war on women supposedly conducted by everyone right of center. This episode, and the one after, are meant to point out the worldwide perpetrators of the real war on women, and shockingly, their very willing allies. I urge women, both from my state of Vermont and from other states in the United States of America, to give these next two episodes of this series very serious attention and consideration. Because as the population of Islamists increases, there will be definite and possibly irreversible negative effects on yourselves, your daughters, your granddaughters, and women young and old for generations to come.
I'm speaking to Michele Walsh of Canada. She is in Halifax, Nova Scotia, or around in that area.
Dave, thank you very much for having me on your show again, you and Cal. And I grew up in a small town in Cape Breton. It's a mining town. People came from all over, probably in the 1920s, from all across Europe to work in the coal mines. So there's no way that we were any kind of privileged people there. I mean, people used to work 7 days a week, 18-hour days, and never get a break, and very poorly treated. But anyway, after Paul Martin, our Liberal government, got into Glace Bay, they shut down the coal mines. And Paul Martin, who was a very wealthy businessman who owned a shipping, shut down the coal mines in Cape Breton and decided to transport cheap Venezuelan coal to Nova Scotia. And as you know, there's a big hate-on for coal in North America. They rather take it from third world countries than to help out their own people. It went from a thriving area in Cape Breton to basically a wasteland where I left. Most of my friends left. So we moved to Halifax. And I worked for the bank here in Halifax. So I never really noticed anything. I thought in university I was living the dream, got a job, having a wonderful life, had children. But after September the 11th, the terror attacks, I noticed that there was more and more people coming to my community and in Halifax that were wearing the scarves. And then probably within a year starting to wear the burqas, the covering of their faces. And I was seeing men wearing white sheets, long beards all over the community. So that was probably, as 9/11 was 2001. So within 15 years, I went from seeing none of them to now when you drive into our city, into Halifax, you can't miss them. They're on our streets. They hang out in our malls. They are in every area you could think of, Walmart. Our towns went from not knowing what it is to serving halal meat in our grocery stores. So anyway, I was just going on about my business with my family, put my daughters into martial arts class. And they were there for 15 years. My oldest, at the time, I think she was about 19, she had gotten her black belt. But the younger one, who was 15, she was just about to get her black belt when the Muslim, he was a young Muslim, I say he was probably in his mid-20s. He did not have a long beard. He just, he had a little scruff, that'll be about it. He joined the martial arts class, which he knew was a co-ed class of about 20 students, about 17 men, or maybe more than 20 students, maybe 25 students, then about 18 men, probably about 5 women. They were not always there at the same time because not everybody went every week. But anyway, she was going there twice a week because she was working to get her black belt when a Muslim man joined the group, and he decided that within the second week he did not want to take any instructions from her because that was part of her duties, was to teach the ones that had lower rankings. She was 15, so he refused to take any instructions from her, and he notified the sensei, which is also the owner of the dojo, that he refused to work with any of the females in the class, and he refused to take any instructions from the class. So I was quite upset about that. But we thought, okay, then, I guess we have no other choice. My daughter's now just about a month or two from getting her black belt. We weren't going to quit over that. So they started to segregate the class, shove the girls over to the corner, because as I said, there was probably about 5 girls, but at this time it was getting close to summer, so maybe 2 or 3 girls would show up a week. So the girls were over in one corner and the men were all took over the rest of the class. Until one day he was handing out, the Muslim was handing out this literature called Islam from Darkness to Light, and in the booklet it talked about how to hit your wife, when to hit her, when to beat her. It talked about women who did not wear Islamic dress were looking for attention and possibly much more, which were they were insinuating that women were whorish and that we were looking to get raped. It talked about Jewish people, how they were the unworthy religion. In this little booklet, it talked about a lot of disgusting things. And so we took the booklet because this was on provincial property, which is taxpayers' property. This rec center was, took it to the sensei, and he told us pretty well to get used to it, that he knew about this booklet. He was given the booklet a month ago from the Muslim, and I contacted, I was outraged by this, that he was allowing these booklets being handed out to young children and young girls. Sonia at the time was 15 years old. So that he was allowing these booklets to be handed out. So from me going to the owner of the rec center, or I guess you could say the associate who takes care of the rec center, they were ignoring me. They were pretending that it didn't happen. I contacted the Human Rights Board in Canada and Nova Scotia. They told me that the Muslim had the right to discriminate and segregate against the women, and they refused to talk about the booklet, because my issue was at first was about the booklet, not so much about the segregation, but about the booklet literally telling that what to hit your women with, and how women are third-class citizens in this booklet. And handing this to my 15-year-old, I was outraged by that. And I couldn't understand why the Human Rights Commission said that he had the right to segregate and demand segregation on a taxpayers-funded municipal property. I was in shock. So I contacted a lawyer, and the lawyer wanted a lot of money, and he said he would take the case on, but I probably would lose, because here in Canada, and this is what he said to me, it seems to be Canadian or governments and politicians are swaying more to Muslims' rights than they are women's rights. We're all equal under the law. Women and religions are no more equal than each other, but somehow over the last couple of years, our society or government or judges are giving more rights to Muslim men than they are to Canadian women or women in general. I wasn't satisfied with that. I must have called the Human Rights Board 4 or 5 times because I wanted them to take up the case about the booklet being handed to a 15-year-old, and what were they going to do about this violent booklet being handed on government property. And they refused to even comment. They were afraid to talk about the booklet. So then I contacted the mayor. I contacted my Liberal and NDP political parties. They refused to even talk to me. The mayor called up because I finally got my story told at the National Post. And the reason why the National Post did my story is because there was segregation going on at York University, where a Muslim man in Ontario was demanding the same thing, segregation from women and himself at university classes. So that they did my story. And when my story came national, Sun News picked it up. And then when Sun News picked it up, I got picked up by other radio shows, and it just continued on from there. So anyway, from what all my investigation, from finally the conservative government contacted me, they said that they were on my side. They felt that it was wrong for our courts or municipalities or politicians, and of course now our schools and everything, to allow segregation going on in our classes. But apparently they said to me, this is the new normal, and we pretty well have to accept it, that women are going to be segregated and discriminated in Canada. So that's my story and what happened.
Well, that's the entire package right there. And this is something that's very important, Michele. It's very important for anyone who is concerned about women's rights. This is just basic stuff about respect.
Yes, because he refused to take any of the instructions from the females.
Right.
They don't want to be around women. And that seems to be what's going on in Canada. And this worries me, that we're going on to the way of now for women who fought for so much rights in the 70s and 80s. Now we're going back where they're going to push us to the side again. And people are going to be told. I was under the understanding from what I grew up with. I'm not that old, but I'm not that young either. I'm 50, that women were equal to men, and it was against the law for anybody you worked with or that joined a group that would say, oh, no, I only want a man to teach me. I was under that impression, but apparently I'm totally wrong. And it's not because of the Jewish faith. It's not because of Hindus or Sheiks. It's because of Islam. And that really worries me as a female and as my daughters who are going to be getting older and going into workforce. What is going to happen with more and more Muslim immigration coming to our countries? Is this going to become now the super norm where we're going to have two of everything, two classrooms, two everything? We're going to be segregated schools again?
Well, speaking as someone who grew up in Texas in the United States and entering the school system pretty much just after segregation had ended, I can tell you it doesn't present a pretty picture, but I will ask you, do you think the motivation behind this is votes? I mean, do you believe that the political elites in Canada are looking at the number of Muslims there are and deciding it's just easier to accommodate them because that means more votes and they will remain in office than it is to refuse them and to demand that they assimilate into the more multicultural aspects of Canada?
Well, I think you're totally right. I mean, I know the political. I saw a study one time that they said that though the party that brings in a certain, I guess you could say, faith, that's the party they normally vote for. And the liberals know that the Christians and most Jewish people will not vote for liberal, because liberals for years have been insulting people of the Christian faith. They're anti-Semitic against Israel. So the liberals, which is like the Democrats of the United States and the NDP, they want to bring in more Muslim votes because they know from studies that the Muslims will side with the party that brought them in, and especially the party who on a daily basis in our mainstream media is defending the Muslim faith, but on the other hand, insulting the Christian faith. So I think it's pushing the people of the Christian faith further to the conservative, which would be the Republicans, and definitely pushing the minorities, which would be the Muslim faith or anybody who doesn't have a faith. I shouldn't even really say that because I don't really have a particular faith and I'm a conservative. But they're definitely pandering to the Muslim vote because the Muslims know they are the one in this country, in Canada, in England, and in the United States that is defending Islam. and that's the party they're going to vote for. I heard the other day, or a report, I think 2 days ago, that the Liberal Party, who are bringing in now 50,000 Muslim immigrants or migrants to Canada, they are not accepting any Christians. And I also heard that that also may be the fact of the Democrats in the United States. So that proves to me that they're totally pandering to the Islamic vote because they know they've lost the Christian vote.
Well, now, let's talk about how this could possibly be turned around, because I'm informed by a frequency of Red Fox Radio that there was a 78% turnout in your last federal election of Islamic voters. Could this situation possibly be turned around and Muslims in your country be made to assimilate to Canadian culture if there were more Christians that actually turned out to vote and elected governments that would not be afraid to stand up to the more segregationist and misogynistic Muslims?
Well, I wish it and hope, of course, that it turns around, but we have a big obstacle in our way. And in the Maritimes, we don't have many news outlets. Our major news outlet is the national broadcast, which is paid for by the tax dollars. And you guys know I hate the CBC. And the CBC is the reason why our Christian and our people who sit on the fence of parties are not getting the information that they need to get to make an informed vote. They're not telling us the truth about what is going on in the Muslim community. In my area, my story went national, except for in the Maritimes, which is where I'm from. So the Maritimes consist of Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, PEI, and New Brunswick. So those provinces did not even hear about what the rest of Canada was talking about because their national broadcasts and the CTV and Global would not pick up the story, because they knew an election was coming in a year or two, and they did not want Maritimers, which we voted all left, we voted all Liberal, which got the Liberal government into power. They didn't want them, the Maritimers, us to hear the truth about segregation going on right in Halifax, in our community. They're keeping it quiet. And the story that I was telling you before we went on the news about the Lebanese couple, now the male and female couple, once again at our airport in Halifax, and found out that they were bringing in tons of cash. And then when they went and searched their home, it was full of weapons that were not bought legally. So there's an arsenal in a home in Halifax. Now, that was not in our mainstream media. I bet you will not see that on the CBC or CTV or Global. They don't want us to find out the truth. It's all hidden. So unless people who sit on the fence that sway back and forth from conservative to liberal don't hear the truth, we will always have this problem. That's my opinion. My opinion is the media is what's destroying us and not sharing the truth. And of course, our liberal universities that are pretending this is not going on, even though we know it's going on in our universities.
I'd like for you to clear up one thing for the American listeners. If you could just quickly clear up for those who don't know what the CBC is.
Oh, the CBC is called the Canadian Broadcast Corporation. It is paid for by the taxpayers. We give them $1.2 billion a year, and they're supposed to inform Canadian on Canadian content, and they're supposed to give us the news. There's also the CBC News Channel. So they have CBC Radio, they have CBC TV, and then they have CBC News. But they don't give Canadians all the real news. It's a very biased opinion. It's a very left opinion. And they are the ones who they have journalists. The journalists, so-called journalists, I call them, that work for them are unionized. And that union, which is all the people who work for the CBC, registered as a third party so that they could campaign against the Conservatives during the election. So they were in conflict of themselves reporting the news. They had the journalists on one hand pretending on the national news daily that they were not biased, but on the other hand, they were having ads on their same network that Canadians pay for, demonizing the conservatives because conservatives wanted to cut their funding because they feel that nobody's watching TV anymore or cable, that people are getting a lot of the news on the net. So they wanted to cut back, and especially in the times of the economic problems that our countries have been having over the last 10 years. So they went on a major campaign or a major corporate or a major network. It's almost like NBC. That's how big this CBC is here in Canada. And they went on a major campaign to demonize the conservatives. So it proved to people that they were biased, but the people in the Maritimes had no idea. They believe everything the CBC tells them because it's the only news that we used to even receive like 15 years ago or 20 years ago. That's all you could get down here before cable and internet. You could just get the CBC. So we've been brainwashed and conditioned over years. So unless we get the mainstream media to stop being so biased, that is the only way I could see us getting out of the mess that we're in.
Okay, and this fits to the purpose of the show. This ties it all into a bow in a way. What you're saying is that not only is there segregation of women in Canada in favor of Muslim men, you're saying that it is ignored and even condoned by the government. And further, you're saying that a taxpayer-funded government news outlet is aiding and abetting this, and that entity itself has employees within it that are what people in the United States would consider to be progressives. So it is, in fact, progressives in the CBC, in the official news media of Canada, who are actually now working against women to promote Islam. Am I correct?
You are absolutely correct.
In the next episode of Wolves in Sheep's Clothing, I continue my interview with Michele Walsh of Canada, who will reveal more about how establishment media is aiding and abetting the true, real war on women. That's it for this time. I appreciate each and every one of you. Thank you for listening, and may your God go with you. Goodbye. The Unpleasant Blind Guy is copyright 2016 Anno Domini.